What is your never interrupt an enemy while they're making a mistake moment? Years ago, I worked extremely hard on preparing a presentation for a tech conference. It would be my first speaking gig, and I was nervous as heck. I practiced, I refined, I got advice, I practiced some more. My manager was generally a nasty woman, but she was supportive of this, though she never once saw or heard my presentation. We traveled to Vegas. It turns out there was a far greater demand than they expected, so they moved us to the main stage room. They were expecting about 500 plus walk ins, and I was 10 times nervous. Well, immediately prior to the start, she noticed a very well known media person and their photographer sitting in the front row. She got all excited and insisted that she was going to co deliver it. She even went so far as to put her name on the title slide. So I, of course, was fuming. We go on stage, she does a decent intro, and then I start in. She keeps interrupting, so I just let her run with it. It reminded me of a morning show, a bunch of people with overwhelmingly fake smiles talking over each other. This was a deeply technical topic with a live demo. She fumbled each slide worse than the next, and then she got to the live demo slide and froze. I had the wherewithal to leave her alone. It was gloriously brutal. We had a, let's say, confrontation after. I left within 2 to 3 months. She got fired shortly after. Oh, and the media people she was prancing for left immediately before the start. I think they were just sitting there from the prior session, so perfect. I'm guessing the live demo was a live nightmare. Good for him, bad for her. Story 2. I was a lead engineer on a very complex auto racing and broadcast-based technical product for many years and had a complete mastery over the system. The company hired a new VP who came in with an attitude and needed to prove himself. So we got called in for an in-person meeting with our main customer who I had known and worked with for years, and my new boss invited himself to the meeting. Moments before the meeting started, my new boss tells me, "I'm going to do all the talking. You just sit and keep your mouth shut." So the customer came in and went, "Hey, good to see you again," and so on, and then my boss introduced himself. Then the person on the other side of the table, who was a high-level executive, by the way, said, "No need for further chit-chat. We have deadlines to make, and we need to figure out how to work out some of the technical challenges," and handed it over to his technical guy. That guy started the conversation with, "Okay, so we have these two systems that need to be integrated. How do you envision working out the time synchronization challenges between the two systems? We need to define an API. How do you want to handle data delays and communication outages to our backend?" and so on. I honestly do not remember the exact string of questions because it was almost 20 years ago. I, not being allowed to speak, sat and slowly turned my head to my boss and stared at him for a good 30 seconds. My boss was livid because it was clear to the customer what had happened, which was confirmed later. He finally gave me the little hand wave, as in, "You may speak," and I went to the whiteboard and diagrammed out the whole system in a matter of minutes, followed by a lively discussion about all the edge cases we had to resolve and how to resolve them. My boss may have spoken 2 words in the entire hour-long meeting. The inevitable below-average rating for understands the technology in my next review happened. I refused to sign the review, refused to be reviewed by him at all after that. I ended up outlasting him. Story 3. When I practiced family law, I saw this often on the stand. Turns out, if your opponent is crazy, most of the time, all you need is to reveal that is give him a microphone and mildly question their story. The best, however, was in motion to withdraw hearings. For context, I hated these hearings. I dreaded them. I already felt like a failure for having to withdraw from a case. 95% of the time because the client couldn't or wouldn't pay me, but sometimes because they turned out to be uncooperative and or combative with me. They were not difficult to win, however. Inevitably, if I simply asked the ex-client when and how they intended to write their retainer, they'd start listing off excuses about how they don't and never will have the money to do so. It's heartbreaking, but it also proves my point. The clients who were uncooperative, however, were the best. I'd read off a list of times they screamed at me, ignored my advice, and threatened me and my staff, then just waited. You could watch them boil on the stand, followed by completely unhinged justifications as to why no lawyer could reasonably work with this person. "Mr. Jones, can you explain why you threatened my paralegal if she called you again?" "She calls me every week with another thing that I have to do. You're supposed to be handling my case. It's why I hired you. I don't have time to be searching through my emails and getting bank records and bringing you papers every damn day. And every time my retainer's empty for like a day, she calls me to remind me to fill it. I've got other things to pay for, like the damn child support you put on me when I left. How rude can you be, right? Right? I swear if I have to hear her damn voice one more time, I'm going to drive over there and hurt her. Your Honor, I rest my case." Story 4. Roommate's ex abandoned their vehicle in front of my house. I tell them to please move it or I'll have it towed. Vehicle suddenly has 2 flat tires. X files a police report claiming my roommate and I had destroyed their tires. Waiting until X made their statement to the police about how we had destroyed their tires and that is why they couldn't move his vehicle, and then filed a claim against us in small claims court. Provided police and the court copies of my and our neighbor's door cam footage showing the X arriving in the middle of the night to destroy their own tires. Cherry on top, X shows up in court wearing the same shirt as in the videos. Roommate and X had only been dating a few months. X turned out to be a grifter and was dating several people at the same time and using each of them for food, shelter, money, etc. I got involved when my roommate was out of town and the soon-to-be X just sauntered in. Apparently they had learned the code to the garage door, made themselves a sandwich, showered, slept, etc. I thought my roommate had come early, but when I texted them, they were still out of state. The X left to go out and I changed the garage code. The vehicle wouldn't start, so they just left it there thinking it'd be okay. Roommates and a few of the other people the X was dating find out about each other and they all dump them at once. I asked the X to please move their car or I will have it towed. I give them 2 weeks. Later on, I learned that the X was having a mental breakdown and they made some very poor decisions at that point. They broke into some of the other people's houses when they weren't home to do laundry, eat, sleep, and did some other things that got them in trouble with the law but are irrelevant to this story. The X had no proof that anyone had destroyed their tires. The cops just came to the door of me and our neighbors to see if there was any footage. There was, and they closed the case, I guess. They never talked to me again about it. The court case was a small claims court. The plaintiff has to pay a fee, file a form, have a summons issued to the defendant, and then you both show up in court with your evidence. The X had no evidence other than a long list of real and perceived grievances with my roommate, but no actual proof, so the judge dismissed the case. I never got to show the video evidence to the judge, but I did share it with the clerk on their lunch break, and they were the one who pointed out that the X was wearing the same shirt. Story 5. At my current job, part of my duties is to do trailer audits. Make sure people are unloading, loading safely, and I was training a new member for the position to do the job. After a few weeks, it turns out that the other person wasn't doing any aspects of the job. Instead, they were just mingling like it was a cocktail party. When asked why they weren't doing anything, they say it was because they were never trained. Well, it turns out that due to past complaints about this particular person, management put them on a PIP that if they got any type of training, they were to have a piece of paper documenting what kind of training it was, who trained them, and management signed off with all party signatures. When they pulled the file that said they were indeed trained in all duties of the job, they just sat there silent and were fired. They were fired because they pulled the same stunt in every department of the building and mine was their last chance. Sounds like they got paid for a couple months to mess around, likely a win in their book. On to the next job, huh? Story 6. Not an enemy, but in retrospect, should have been. I work as a teacher, and we had an ex-manager guy who decided to get into teaching late. He had lots of pretty horrible habits, eating other people's lunches, staring at the female teachers. But the habit that this story is about is how he tried to use weaponized incompetence to get people to do his tasks for him. None of it was really important, he just seemed to enjoy talking people into doing things for him. So he comes up to me one day with a USB data stick in his hand. Apparently it has a copy of a previous year's exam that it was his responsibility to update and edit. He'd taken the file home and his daughter had done the update. Really, dude? Roping family into doing your paid government job for you? He wanted me to copy the file from the USB back into the server, replacing the original file he'd copied. It was literally click and drag between the USB and the file server. I flat out refused and said it was part of his responsibility and I was too busy with my own tasks anyway. He proceeds to loudly and publicly proclaim to the entire staff that I didn't understand how difficult it was for people of his generation to learn computer technology and that I really needed to help him out. He was currently doing a computer course, but this, dragging a file between 2 folders, was too difficult for him to sort out. I let him go on for about a good 5 minutes about how horrible I was for not helping the poor, helpless old man out, until I just as loudly asked him, how the hell do you get the original file from the server onto the USB in the first place? You could have heard a pin drop in that staff room. He walked out and copied his own goddamn file. Story 7. Back when I was at university, our final year was a big multidisciplinary group project where students from different courses formed teams to build games over the course of the year. I joined a team where I had basically 2 roles because my degree was split in focus, somewhat stupidly. It was a mistake to sign up for it, but oh well. Another guy on our team had the same, so between us, we were supposed to be doing the work of 2, just split into 2 areas. He did nothing. I took one half of his work. Someone else took the other half. What work he did was terrible quality and unusable and had to be redone. It was a mess. We tried talking to him about it repeatedly, but to no avail. He just didn't put in the work. The warning sign was probably that this was his 5th year of a 3-year degree. The dude took 2 attempts every year. Part of our submission was a massive report where we were each supposed to break down what we did on the project, how and why. We left his section as basically a single sentence stating, name contributed to the project. That was more than he deserved, but at the same time, it essentially called out explicitly that he did almost no work, including on the shared document. We didn't tell him that section was there, but we were all in that same doc writing, and we were all expected to contribute. He would have seen it if he'd opened it to write anything during the entire process. He flipped out when he found out after submission he did not graduate, and I don't feel sorry for him. Story 8. Not mine, obviously, but the Space Shuttle Challenger engineer that knew it would explode. He repeatedly said the cold weather would cause a failure despite pressure from the NASA administration. He describes then as making the best decision of his life, refusing to sign the paper indicating he approves of the launch, forcing his boss to do it. At the governmental inquiry after the passing of the astronauts, NASA said the engineers signed a paper approving the launch that day, which, yeah, that's true, but worded as deceptive as can be. Bob then stood up, walked to the hearing, said that he personally refused the launch but was overruled by the stunned members of the hearing. The government fired the NASA execs and made Bob head of the investigation. Story 9. I was a lead developer in a small company producing IoT devices. My manager hired his friend from his previous company, a guy who was super arrogant and knew everything better. Theoretically, my opinion on the development of the project should be decisive, but neither my manager nor his buddy cared about it. I tried to talk to the manager about the problems with the new colleague, but he just brushed me off. The new guy, being so brilliant, was given one important component of the system to do. Of course, he made it clear that he didn't need any help from me. Weeks and months passed. In the meetings, his component was always in the last phase of testing. But I had access to the Git repository, and I saw how messy it was. No one asked for my opinion, so I didn't say anything. I waited. The deadline has come, the release of the product, and of course, nothing works. Higher management became interested in the case, and my manager could only avoid being fired in one way. He fired his buddy. A few weeks later, I left the company. That was over a year ago, and as far as I know, the product still hasn't hit the market. Story 10. As a CPS worker at the time, speaking to a father with police present in a case concerning substance abuse, and the father admitting being spiked and thinking the cops were there to arrest his daughter for stealing his substances, admits to me that she stole it because he let her have some because, quote, if I didn't give it to her, she'd be a street worker to go get it. Just an entire 45-minute conversation with a guy having no apparent awareness that he had just told a CPS worker and 2 cops that he, 1, is currently spiked, 2, routinely provides substances to his daughter, 3, has substance in his trailer behind him, 4, his daughter had been at the trailer with him while substance was in the trailer, 5, the substance was stored where she could easily access it and she knew where it was, and 6, he used it with her. Just unfathomable levels of, I'm struggling to believe this conversation is actually happening and I'm afraid if I say anything he'll come to his senses and shut up. Story 11. During my very long and exhausting divorce, my ex-husband kept insisting he was ready to settle. We would schedule a conference with my lawyer and I and then push papers around the table for 2 hours. We would just argue over petty details rather than actually discuss anything. This happened a few times. I was incredibly frustrated because I genuinely walked into this wanting to compromise so it would be over quickly, but that was never an option. Note that I hired a lawyer and he did not. He was convinced he could do it on his own, better. So after a few rounds of this, I got the impression that he was trying to waste my money until I could no longer retain my lawyer, and then he thought he would have the upper hand. I made less than half of what he did at the time, and my lawyer's retainer fee wiped out my entire savings, so it was a very real concern. My suspicions were confirmed when one day as we were walking out of my lawyer's office, he told me this, word for word, while chuckling. I passed this on to my lawyer who actually cackled and told me, let him. It was then later that I learned that we were 6 months out from being married for 10 years, and at that point, I would be entitled to a sizable part of his pension upon retirement. She let him play his games for 6 more months without saying a word, and then finally took our case before a judge 5 days after our 10-year anniversary. Not only did I get part of his pension, but she also got the judge to order him to pay almost all of my lawyer fees. The beauty of it was that it was 100% his fault for playing games. Story 12. I used to live in an apartment that had a very old lease. College students basically passed this place's lease down like inheritance until it came to us. And legally, the landlord could only increase the rent yearly by a small fraction of the current lease's rent. The exceptions to this were if the apartment was being renovated, in which case it would be her responsibility to accommodate us while renovating, or if it had been vacant for a year between leases. She knew our lease's rent was extremely low, so she wanted to get rid of us and jack up the rent on a new tenant. She sent us a letter about 2 weeks before our lease would be renewed saying she was renovating and we'd have to leave. Well, it happened that my roommate was not just a college student, but a law student, and he happened to know she had to give us a lot more notice than that. So we plainly told her we weren't leaving and she'd be welcome to take us to court, which she did. She told the judge she wanted to renovate, and the judge asked her for the new floor plan and a cost estimate of the proposed renovation. She had none of those things. When the judge asked why, she said she'd only decided to renovate a week prior. When the judge asked why she'd taken this decision after the legal deadline, 6 months' notice is required to end a lease, she said she was only renovating so she could start a new lease on the property. The judge literally face-palmed at her response, dismissed the case, and renewed our lease with no rent increase for the year, since she hadn't presented us a new one with enough delay to contest it. We were just sitting there with our mouths open, bewildered that she could have been dumb enough to say the quiet part out loud straight to the judge. Story 13. My ex-boss was a complete schmuck in every aspect. We worked as surveyors using drones to scan and survey large areas, and he would go out of his way to get the cheapest and least reliable drones to do the job. One of those drones was this god-awful fixed wing, shaped like a plane with only one propeller that you launched using this awful slingshot system that had like a 50% chance of just launching the thing nose down into the ground. I told him these things are a piece of crap. I even recorded my launches with it so he could see this thing was a piece of crap, but he insisted I was just a terrible pilot who couldn't take off a DJI to save my life. After 3 crashes, 2 rolls of duct tape, and a few arguments, he decides to come to the next big job we have and just do it himself. Now, the turnover times for these jobs were insane. The man had zero concept for how long things would take, so he'd promised the clients the data the very next day, which meant that everything would have to go perfectly the day of the flight with 0 delays, so I could process the data overnight and have it ready for them the next day. No room for errors, no second chances. Every morning, it was make or break. So we get to the site in the early morning and I'm completely hands-off. Normally, I'd pack a second drone for when this one inevitably kamikazes into the earth. But this time, you know what? I decided he needs a taste of humble pie. I watch as he sets up the drone, runs through the checks, loads it into that god-awful slingshot, and gets ready to pull the trigger. I take a few steps back, take out my phone to record, and watch the fireworks. He pulled the lever and the bungee cord released. It whipped the drone 10 feet into the air at Mach 2 before the thing nosedived right into the ground, breaking off one of the wings. After about 2 seconds of teetering on the ground, the drone's autopilot thought to itself, "Hey, that was a launch, wasn't it?" and automatically kicked the propeller into high gear, shattering it against the cold, unforgiving ground. He just watched the whole thing happen with a cold look in his eyes. Once the drone settled down and the throws stopped, he picked up the drone, walked back to us, and said, "Well, crap." The 4-hour drive back to the office was completely silent, and our boss had to call the client and explain why we wouldn't be delivering the data to them on time. We had another job we had to do the next day, so they'd only have it the next week. I could hear the client screaming to him over the phone from the next room. Needless to say, we never used that drone again. He never stopped buying terrible drones, but when I told him they were crap, he believed me. And if you're enjoying the video so far, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 14. I once worked for a project in a call center, and we constantly had QA in our back about call quality. They would review every call and send the report to you and your supervisor, who would sign off on it, then send it back to QA. If you got 2 reports under 90%, there'd be a warning and you'd be fired after 4. Now, this was all done via email, so I'd save all my reports just in case. My first couple of weeks, I got dinged with a warning, but everything after that, I maintained at least 95% or above according to the reports I was getting. One week, I noticed a few agents were getting let go, agents I always thought were good. At the time, the project was looking for supervisors, and these were the guys you would want. I found out they had all been hit with bad reports, which led to the firings. Then one day, HR calls me and lets me know I'm fired for several reports saying I scored insanely low scores. Just one problem. I had the report saying these were all over 90%, and I told HR I had them. The HR rep asks me to forward all of them to review, and I do so. A couple hours later, I get another call from HR saying I'm being reassigned to another project with better pay. Turns out the QA was fudging the reports after the supervisors signed off on select agents because they had certain agents they were friends with and wanted them to get the management positions. Even worse, everyone in management knew and didn't care. The project got shut down and the fired agents were all brought back and placed in better paying projects like I was. Story 15. I was doing a mortgage for a French guy in Miami Beach that had a French realtor. Even though both were completely fluent in English, she frequently did asides in French, having no idea I spoke the language too. When they settled on her property and we were riding the elevator down from the condo, she told him that, look, these guys are schmucks and they're going to screw you over and have a much better person that you can work with, even though the way foreign investment works is identical throughout the state. Towards the end of the ride, I say to the guy in fluent French that we would be happy to compare our proposal with whatever her people could come up with, and it's his choice, but certainly we would like to work with him on this and any future investments. He started laughing, and she was completely mortified. He went with us and fired her as his agent on the spot. Yikes. Now that elevator ride must have been the worst, most awkward 30 seconds of her life. Classic stuff. Story 16. When I was a teenager, a cousin of mine, Jenny, had a fight with her mom, Jackie. The fight was so intense, so she called mom and dad asking for help and asked to live here for a while. At the time, that sounded horrifying, but we quickly learned that Jenny was full of crap. Jenny was a drama queen, loved to stir up trouble, lied constantly about basically everything, and Jackie never laid a hand on her. We had heard rumors but dismissed them and believed her until one incident. Mom always kept a few frozen pies in the freezer just in case company came over. Jenny took a pie from the freezer one day, ate the entire damn thing, and when Mom came home, she got angry because those pies were for company. She asked Jenny who ate the pie, and she said I did. She yells for me. I come into the kitchen. She asks if I ate the pie. I said no, and get yelled at for eating the pie. Jenny then proceeds to launch into telling this overly elaborate tale about how I took the pie and ate it just to get her in trouble. She went on for like 3 minutes, and Mom just kept getting angrier and angrier at me, while I couldn't help grin like a madman. 3 minutes later, she finishes her story, and I point something out. It was a coconut pie she ate. I despise coconut. I hate it and will never eat it. Mom knew this, and the realization hits her. Jenny gets a look of horror in her face. She got grounded for a month. The look of both of them is seared in my mind. Makes me smile when I think about it. The funny thing is, she tried it again 2 months later, this time eating a chocolate pie, but Mom didn't believe her this time. Story 17. I was working as a cub reporter in a small town and had done a piece on stray dog menace in some area. Plenty of dogs had attacked kids in a short while. The dog lovers of the town took that piece as an I hate all dogs article. They shared it in their WhatsApp group and started talking trash about me. What they did not know was that the admin of the group ran a dog shelter, and a few months back, I had done a piece on the shelter, so I was in the group too. At one point, they began scheming that they'd cook up stories about me lying in the story and complain to the publication. Now, mind you, these are upstanding citizens, doctors, lawyers, senior executives, so their word had weight against a rookie reporter. I just showed the chat to the editor. He had a good laugh about it. Never knew what happened after that, but hours later, they stopped complaining about me. The admin of the group apologized to me separately. He didn't need to, but never did tell them that I was a part of it. Story 18. Decades ago, I worked for a small luxury furniture store. Part of it was managing the paperwork. Part of it was programming the software. I wanted a raise, so I asked the new office manager for one. He was a real piece of work. Roundly despised, he explained to me that I deserved a raise, but because we had so many outstanding accounts receivable, he couldn't afford it. So if I can get an AR down, there's money to pay me. He agreed, but I had to get it down to 0, and I had 3 months. So I became a debt collector. This was a luxury furniture store, so our clients had money. It turns out that the reason so many had outstanding bills is that no one was willing to ask the rich people for money. I did, and they paid. However, not all did. I was given permission to contract with a debt collection service. Any debts passed to them were no longer reflected on AR, and that cleared quite a few debts. A few others were written off when they threatened to sue over old bills. Those went straight to the owner, and he didn't want bad publicity. At the end of the 3 months, I had a meeting with the office manager. He was looking over the accounts receivable and told me he was very impressed. I knew what was coming, so I let him ramble on. I had pulled in a ton of money for the company. He was happy about that. He'd love for me to permanently add collections to my responsibilities. I was doing great work. But there's just one problem, Ovid Pearl. AR isn't at 0. There's still thousands outstanding. I can't give you that raise. I pointed to the accounts still outstanding. If you check the unpaid accounts, you'll see that almost all of them are members of the owner's family. I can send them to collections if you like. That will actually reduce our AR below zero. He was angry and quickly told me to forget about it. I got the raise. Story 19. I was making a delivery in the downtown area of a small city. I worked for an event rental service, tents, tables, chairs, that kind of stuff. We made deliveries using large box trucks with hydraulic lift gates at the back. And for those who don't know, a liftgate is a heavy metal mini elevator that fits underneath the back bumper of large trucks and folds out a few feet behind the truck whenever you need to use it. Finding parking downtown in a big truck can already be a huge inconvenience, but we found a spot right outside of the venue we were delivering to. It was a very busy street, so that was crazy lucky. We didn't have a ton of space to work with, but we had enough room to fold out the liftgate behind the truck and a bit of ground to work with behind that. I had two other people working with me. One would stay up in the truck, and I and another would take turns running the gate and carrying the stuff inside. This is when an older woman in a nice BMW SUV decided that she was going to parallel park right behind us and take the little working space behind the truck that we had. Sure, it's annoying and inconsiderate, but hey, it's a city and people need to park. I get it. Now, our guy up in the truck was readying the next load of stuff to come down to the ground, so the liftgate was lifted all the way up, about 5 feet in the air. The lady in the SUV backs up, cuts her wheel, and destroys the absolute crap out of her Beamer right into our steel liftgate. She finished the park job, but her SUV is cosmetically messed up. The passenger fender and headlight area is annihilated, and naturally our big hunk of steel is unscathed. She gets out and starts screaming at us that it's somehow our fault, and this is where nature takes its course. She lays into all three of us for a solid 2 or 3 minutes and eventually loses a little steam. I give her a chance and tell her that she's fighting a losing battle and that we aren't at fault. Of course, she immediately fires back up like a lunatic and calls the cops. I shrug at her, and we complete the rest of our delivery, and the cops show up a few minutes later. When they pull up, this lady is in her 80s. "Oh, officers, I'm so glad you're here. That's them over there." No joke, literally pointing at us. The cop asks what's going on, and we don't even have to open our mouths. This lady tells the whole story about how she crunched her BMW into our parked truck. The cops look over to me, and I just give them an exhausted headshake. "Well, ma'am," the cops explain that she is at fault, and the cherry on top is the citation she received for running into us. Story 20. Preface, I have always done my paperwork in a blue Pilot G2 pen, not chilling. It's a very distinct color and hard to cover. At one of my previous jobs, I had just gotten my machine making products ready for packing. The only problem was the outer lip diameter was just too big, think 0.01 of an inch off. Nothing I did could get the diameter down. It was just too hot for the plastic to be formed smaller without cooling it further, which was not then possible. Quality and my supervisor quibbled about it for a while. It was decided and hoped the product would further shrink in storage as it continued to cool and set. So quality tech signed off approving the variance. Several months down the line, a couple customers complained lids aren't fitting right sometimes, later found out only with hot foods or in hot environments. I get called into the front office for a final warning, a big quality alert. They ended up refunding anyone who bought a product made by me and a copy of the quality paperwork. Quality Tech is saying she never approved me running that product with the quality variance and has a copy of my paperwork proving it. I waited until everyone spoke their piece, pulled out my pen, flipped the write-up over, and wrote, "I refuse to sign this write-up because I do not deserve it." I then told them to go pull every quality sheet, every training sign-off, and even my job application and job offer, and notice I write in blue ink. The quality sheet in front of me is a photocopy because all my writing is in black, not blue. Plant manager threw the write-up into the shredder and told me to go home for the day. I had already worked a 12-hour shift before this, and forget about this happening. He did not look amused. There was a new quality tech the next night I walked in. Story 21. Back when speed camera vans were common in the area and was living in at the time, I was running some errands one time and noticed a van on the side of a fairly busy road, situated on a bend, so if you were northbound, you likely wouldn't notice it until you were in a curve. I had a bit of back and forth running around that I had to do and noticed it was still there an hour or so later when I passed it on the opposite direction. Later in the day, I was still taking care of things and was headed north again on the same road. There was a real aggressive schmuck in traffic this time, speeding when he would, weaving in the lanes to try to get ahead even though it was now rush hour and no real progress would be made, gunning his engine, etc. And I could see after a couple stoplights that this guy was peeved at the audacity all these other people had at having to be on the road the same time as him. He wound up at a stoplight next to me and one car behind, following someone that didn't pull away at the green quite as fast as I did, so he cut somebody off to get over to my lane. Now he's tailgating me on the northbound stretch, and I wondered if the speed trap was still set up. Because I'd gone a little quicker than the guy next to me, a gap started to open in the left lane, but he's still on my back because it hadn't yet widened out to full car length. So as we started nearing the curve where I had seen the trap earlier, I sped up a little to increase the gap, then took my foot off the gas going into the turn. Mr. Agro Driver did what I predicted he would and stepped it to overtake me on the outside right as the camera van became visible. The pop of the flash when he passed the van did put a grin on my face. Story 22. My ex-coworker was a POS and he was using, "I have a baby, so I need certain shifts more." But that didn't matter if he randomly decided to get hammered. He would call me in the middle of the night to cover his morning shift, etc., etc. And I would cover his shift, and yet when I needed him to cover my shift, which I would ask him days, even weeks in advance, he would pull a "I have a baby" card. Christmas season comes and I ask him if I can take the 31st of December morning shift so I can spend New Year's evening with my boyfriend, go somewhere, celebrate, etc. He got almost mad because I asked. His words were, "No, I have a baby. It's his first New Year's Eve. I have to spend it with him and the wife." Okay, fine, whatever. And then the night of the 30th came. I was awake at 2 a.m. gaming or watching Netflix. I felt my phone vibrate and look who it is, my coworker who is hammered somewhere and needs his morning shift covered. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and in my drawer. I didn't answer. Next morning, I had 50 missed calls from him, a few from other coworkers, and 10ish from my boss. He didn't show up for work. He got fired that day. Work environment became so much healthier. Story 23. I was an attorney. Other side sues my client alleging he missed work for FMLA protected reasons, and his termination was wrongful. I looked up the plaintiff in the public records database and saw that he had court dates on all the days he missed work. Instead of completely confronting the plaintiff to give him time to change his story, I deposed the plaintiff and have him walk me through every minute of every day he missed work. He leaves out the court part. A month after the deposition, after the time passes when the deposition can be corrected, I send plaintiff's lawyers printouts of the court records with the relevant dates highlighted, along with a paperwork to voluntarily dismiss the case and a letter stating that any further action in the case will result in a motion against him for bad faith litigation. I didn't hear a peep from the lawyer, but get the dismissal order from the judge a week later. Story 24. Before I changed careers, I was working in an office and I had a team of 4 employees I was managing. My boss, who was incredibly dumb, wanted to see what grade I gave to my employees as part of their annual evaluation. I had 4 great employees who were working hard and well, and I could even show them some stuff past their level, telling them it could be useful experience if they wanted to later get a higher paying job at a higher level. Needless to say, their results were much higher than expected, especially for 2 of them. So I gave 2 of them an A and the other 2 others a B. My boss disagreed with me, telling me how their work has to be especially amazing to deserve such grades. She talked to me about the normal distribution and how there should be X amount of A, B, and C. I let her go. I take back the sheets with their evaluation grades and everything I wrote about them. I ask her what exactly makes them not deserving. She rambles. I ask her what their day-to-day looks like. She rambles some more, getting a bit angry. I ask her what so-and-so last names are. She doesn't even know. I told her if she doesn't know anything about that, she has no clue how they are performing and therefore can't tell me to change it. I ask her what she'd do if the majority of the employees perform well. Would she give out D and E grades just to follow normal distribution? She tells me no, it would be ridiculous. I told her doing the same for A and B would be ridiculous too, and that's what she does. I told her if she wants, she can give me an E, but she won't change the evaluations of my employees as soon as I leave her office. I'd show them their grades so they'd know she's the one who changed them if it happened to change. Turns out they kept their A and B. I got a C. I didn't care. I left soon after and changed my career. Never looked back. Story 25. It's so dumb, but so fun. Years ago, I worked in a cube farm office job, and I hated my desk arrangement. It was right in a high-traffic pathway with my back to everyone, screen facing out, so anyone could just sneak up behind me, lurking, peering over my shoulder while I worked, etc., which really just bothers me. I was the first person in my department anyone would encounter, and I was also very good at what I did, so people would just see me first and interrupt me constantly all day. Well, the office got reconfigured, and me and a bunch of other people in that area worked in a big conference room for a couple of days during the shuffle. The guy moving around all the cubicle panels was a good friend, so I told him to ping me the minute a back wall desk was finished so I could move my stuff there. He did, and I did. This other guy I was friends with saw what I was doing and followed me, so we claimed the back two wall desks across from each other. There was a super obnoxious senior developer who figured out way too late what was going on and got very angry. Apparently, there was some old seating chart which no one had followed at all as they redid the cube section by section, and it had him on a back wall, so he grabbed his old seating chart printout and marched into the senior VP's office right then and there to complain. I heard him ranting and raving about the chart this and the chart that. He needed to sit in the back to concentrate, blah, 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 blah. I just let him monologue for a minute or two because, for some reason, he was exceptionally frantic about it. At the absolute perfect time, I got up to go to the break room, and as I walked by, I poked my head into the office, chuckling innocently, and said, "Come on, boss name, it's too busy for this silly stuff. I'll move my desk. Who cares where we sit?" It was like a 5-second TKO. He immediately started stammering about how much he didn't care and how he insisted I just keep my stuff there. So I feigned indifference and said, "Okay, no problem." It was one of my greatest moments in petty office politics. Story 26. I worked at a large juice manufacturer printing labels for the bottles. We had a particular production manager who thought she was my boss. She wasn't. We were on the same level of the hierarchy and thought her stuff was a priority to me. She could not understand that we had a whole process and knew exactly what needed to be printed and what order to fulfill all of our orders. Our boss told me to just do my best to work with her and get her what she requested so she'd shut up. She decided one day to order 150K of each label for two particular lines we had so she would never have to wait for labels again. The whole company knew that regulations were changing and requirements on labels were changing. I tried to explain this to her and I didn't think this was a good plan. She insisted repeatedly. I finally said screw it and started doing it while having my team do their best to keep up with our actual priorities. Stayed late, got lots of overtime. When our boss finally clued into the order, I was 300K labels into 600K of the first line. When asked, I told him that he had told me to do what it takes to make her stop complaining, and that's what I was doing. He put an instant stop to it. She got written up, and those labels were still on a shelf in the corner 3 years later when we shut down. And well, if you liked any of these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.